They say the hills remember what the people forget, and in the Ozarks of 1867, the wind still whispers about the Whitaker boys. The story goes that their mother sold them, not for money or mercy but for the promise of rain. That year, every creek had dried to dust, and the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. But when the rain finally came, it brought something else with it, something that took more than it ever gave back. Before we continue, subscribe for more untold dark history stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see who's hearing this when the night is quiet enough to listen. The Whitakers lived on the far end of Hollow Ridge, where the trees grew so thick even the sun had to fight its way through. Their cabin leaned toward the slope as if it wanted to slide down and disappear. Elias Whitaker was 21, lean and quiet, with eyes the color of winter water. His brother Jonas was 19 and restless, with a mouth that always twitched before he spoke, like words never came easy. Their mother, Martha, was the kind of woman people in town called unlucky, to avoid calling her cursed. She'd buried 2 infants before the boys and one husband who'd gone missing in a mining accident, or so she said. The first sign of trouble began in the spring when Martha stopped praying. Every morning she used to kneel by the window and whisper her verses to the dawn. But by April she just sat staring out at the dead garden, her lips barely moving. Jonas said she was talking to the soil. Elias didn't believe him until he saw it himself. One evening she crouched in the dirt with both hands sunk wrist deep, murmuring to something that wasn't there. When he asked her what she was doing, she looked up, her eyes clouded and distant. "Listening," she said. By May, animals started vanishing. Chickens gone from the coop, the old mule found stiff in the barn, its eyes pecked out by something that hadn't left tracks. When Elias tried to bury it, he found strange marks carved into its flank, tiny circles arranged like the phases of the moon. That night, he heard his mother crying softly in her room, whispering the names of her sons as if reciting them for someone else. Jonas said they should leave. Go north to St. Louis, maybe find work at the river docks. But Martha wouldn't hear of it. "The land don't belong to us," she told them. "We belong to it." And there was something in her voice, something cracked and hollow, that made both brothers fall silent. One evening, a storm gathered without warning. The air turned green, and the sky rolled with thunder that never broke into rain. Martha told her sons to stay inside and not to open the door no matter what they heard. Then she took her lantern and walked straight into the forest. Jonas tried to follow, but Elias held him back. "If she wants to go," he said, "let her." Hours passed. The storm never came, yet the wind screamed through the trees like it was alive. When Martha returned, her dress was soaked, but not with rain. Mud streaked her face like war paint. She didn't speak. She just dropped something on the table, 2 small bundles wrapped in cloth. When Elias unwrapped his, he found a charm made of bone and red string, still damp, smelling faintly of iron. "Wear it," Martha said. "It'll keep you safe." That night, Elias dreamed of 2 women standing at the edge of the woods. One tall, one small, both with hair long enough to brush the ground. Their faces were pale as the moon, and their eyes glowed faintly green. When he woke he could still hear them humming, a sound like wind through hollow wood. Jonas said he'd had the same dream. By June, Martha began leaving the cabin after sundown. The boys would wake and find her gone, her footprints leading toward Devil's Hollow, a ravine no one in town dared cross. Folks said 2 witches lived there, sisters older than any living soul, who traded in blood and secrets. Most dismissed it as superstition, but not the Whitakers. The woods around their home had a way of listening. One night, Elias decided to follow her. The moon was a thin slit in the sky, and fireflies clung to the dark like floating embers. He trailed her down the ridge until she stopped at a clearing he'd never seen before. In the center stood a stone altar slick with moss. 2 figures waited beside it, draped in tattered shawls, their skin so pale it seemed to shine. Martha approached them with her head bowed. Elias crouched low behind a fallen log. He couldn't hear every word, but he caught enough to know the meaning. "They're good boys," his mother said, voice trembling. "Strong, obedient. You said they'd live better with you." One of the women laughed softly. The other reached out, touching Martha's face with a hand too long, too thin. "We'll take care of them," she whispered. "They'll never hunger again." Elias froze. He wanted to rush forward, to shout, to stop whatever bargain was being made, but something in the air held him still. The sound around him thickened, like the forest itself was holding its breath. When Martha turned to leave, her eyes looked empty, her face streaked with tears she didn't wipe away. The 2 women stood unmoving as she vanished into the trees. Then, slowly, both lifted their heads and looked directly toward the place where Elias hid. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight like a predator's. He ran. Branches tore at his clothes, the forest spinning into shadow. By the time he reached the cabin, the lamps had gone out. Jonas sat by the window, staring into the dark. "I saw them too," he said quietly. "They called me by name." The next morning Martha was gone again. Her bed was cold, her Bible left open to a blank page. Outside, fresh footprints led from the door toward the forest, and two smaller sets followed after. In the weeks that followed, the sky finally broke. Rain poured over the ridge for 7 days straight. The crops rose green, the well filled, the animals returned. But the Whitaker cabin stood empty. Only the neighbors who passed by said they sometimes saw three shapes moving near the tree line at dusk. One woman and two boys behind her, walking hand in hand toward Devil's Hollow. They called them the Sisters of Devil's Hollow, though no one ever agreed on what they were. Some said witches, others said widows who'd learned too much. A few whispered they were the last of an older kind, born before the mountains had names, before people started measuring time. But everyone agreed on one thing. Once you went into Devil's Hollow, you didn't come back the same. Elias and Jonas Whitaker didn't remember the walk down the mountain. They only knew they woke on a dirt floor, the air thick with smoke and herbs that burned the nose. The walls around them weren't wood or stone, they looked like pressed roots, twisted into shapes that moved when the light flickered. Above them, something dripped steadily like rain inside a cave. The first witch they saw was tall, her hair dark as coal dust, eyes pale gray. She called herself Sister Mavis. The other was smaller, with hair white as ash and skin so thin the veins beneath it looked like blue ink. Her name was Cora. They said the boy's mother had sent them there to be healed, to be made whole. Neither brother knew what that meant. For a while, life in the hollow seemed almost kind. The witches fed them thick bread and broth that tasted of wild mushrooms. They gave them soft quilts, taught them the names of stars, and warned them never to wander outside after dark. "The woods change at night," Cora whispered one evening as she brushed Jonas's hair. "They start remembering things they shouldn't." Elias didn't trust them. He felt it in the way the air in the cabin never grew stale, though no window was ever opened. The way the witches watched the brothers when they slept, whispering in a language that made the fire dim. But Jonas changed quickly. He smiled more, his eyes glassier. He said the witches reminded him of their mother, gentle, soft-spoken, forgiving. He didn't notice how his skin had begun to pale, or how his shadow had started to fade beneath the lantern light. One night, Elias woke to find his brother missing. The door was open, wind curling in from the forest. He followed muddy footprints down to the stream, where he saw Jonas standing knee-deep in the black water, his arms stretched out, his head tilted back. Sister Mavis stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his chest. The water rippled though no wind blew. Elias saw something moving beneath the surface, faces pale and distorted, rising and falling in rhythm with Jonas's breath. He tried to shout, but his voice caught. Mavis turned slowly, her eyes like glass. "He's remembering," she said softly. "You should too." By morning, Jonas had no memory of what happened. He only said he felt lighter. His skin glowed faintly, his heartbeat so slow Elias had to press his ear against his chest to hear it. When he mentioned leaving, Jonas smiled in a way Elias had never seen. "Why would we?" he said. "They said we're part of something now." Days bled together. The witches began teaching them chants, strange syllables that tasted like metal when spoken. They carved small symbols into the brothers' wrists, sealing each cut with a drop of black oil. They said it would bind their souls. Sometimes, Elias thought he heard his mother's voice calling from the woods beyond the hollow. Other times he heard crying. Once he followed the sound and found the witches digging near a circle of stones, burying something wrapped in linen. When he asked what it was, Cora only said, "Debt." That night, Elias dreamed again. This time of the cabin on Hollow Ridge, the roof collapsing under rain, his mother standing in the doorway with her eyes hollowed out. She reached for him, her hands trembling. "They took too much," she whispered. "Don't let them finish." When he woke, his pillow was damp with tears he didn't remember shedding. Weeks later, a traveler passed near Devil's Hollow. He was a hunter named Caleb Pike, a man known for shooting anything that breathed. He told people later he'd followed the sound of voices through the trees and come upon a clearing where two women stood chanting over two motionless figures on the ground. "Like a prayer," he said, "but older, older than God." The figures were pale, thin, with eyes half open but unblinking. When one of the women turned and saw him, the air around him went still. His gun jammed. His horse bolted. He ran until he couldn't breathe. After that night, Pike stopped hunting altogether. He said the woods around Devil's Hollow were wrong, that you could hear whispering even when there was no wind. When asked what he saw last, he said only this: they weren't dead, but they weren't breathing either. Inside the witch's house, Elias began to notice his reflection changing. His eyes no longer matched his brother's, they were darker, rimmed in red. His face seemed stretched, sharper at the jaw. And sometimes when he spoke, his voice sounded doubled, like something else was speaking with him. Cora watched him carefully. "You're fighting it," she said one night, her tone almost sad. "You should let it happen. It hurts less when you stop remembering who you were." He wanted to ask what she meant, but she only smiled, her teeth small and even. That evening she brought him a bowl of milk-tinted gray. "Drink," she said. "It'll keep the forest from swallowing you whole." Elias didn't drink. He waited until she turned her back, then poured it into the dirt. The soil hissed where it fell. A few nights later, the witches gathered the brothers before the hearth. The fire burned white and the smoke twisted into shapes: faces, hands, branches. "Tonight you'll join," Mavis said. "Body to body, bone to bone. The way you were born, the way you'll return." Elias felt something move beneath his skin, like vines wrapping around his ribs. Jonas smiled dreamily, whispering words Elias couldn't understand. The room pulsed with light, and the sound of distant thunder rolled through the floor. For a heartbeat, Elias saw through the haze, his brother's face melting into his own reflection. Two bodies becoming one shadow. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The witches looked pleased. Jonas fainted. And in that silence, Elias realized what the ritual had done. He couldn't hear his brother breathing anymore. But he could feel him inside his chest, heartbeat echoing faintly beside his own. Outside, the forest held its breath again. Something old had awakened, and it was still hungry. The hills were quiet that spring, too quiet for Missouri. Even the crows had stopped calling near Hollow Ridge, as if the trees themselves were holding a secret they didn't dare speak. Down in the valley, their mother, Ruth Whitaker, sat on the porch of the old shack with a jug of sour cider clutched in her hands and her bare feet sunk in mud. She had not slept a full night since she'd sent her boys away. At first she told herself it was mercy. The witches had promised to cleanse the family blood, to wash out the sickness that had followed the Whitakers for generations. Madness, fever, the kind of inbreeding that made whole towns whisper. Ruth thought she'd bought salvation. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jonas's face the morning they left. Silent, trusting, carrying the wooden horse their father had carved before he hanged himself in the barn. By May, guilt had turned her thin. She stopped going to the well, stopped cooking, stopped opening the shutters. The townsfolk thought she'd gone strange. The preacher's wife brought bread once a week, but Ruth barely spoke. Only at night, when thunder crawled along the ridges, did she mutter to the dark, "You said they'd be safe." One evening, a knock came at her door, 3 slow taps, like knuckles against coffin wood. Ruth froze. No one visited that late. When she opened it, a young girl stood there, soaked through by rain, eyes blank as glass. "They told me to give you this," she said, handing Ruth a bundle wrapped in muslin. Before Ruth could speak, the girl turned and walked straight into the woods, feet leaving no prints. Inside the bundle was a tuft of blonde hair tied with thread, and beneath it, a small carved horse, the same one Jonas had carried. The wood was damp and cold as flesh. Ruth dropped it and fell to her knees, choking on a sob she hadn't let out in months. That night she built a fire and burned every charm, every letter, every scrap of faith she'd placed in the Sisters of Devil's Hollow. By morning she was gone. The next people to see her were trappers up the ridge who found a woman barefoot, carrying nothing but a lantern and a sack of salt. She asked them for the path to Devil's Hollow. They told her there wasn't one, that no map drew it, no compass found it, but she kept walking until the trees closed behind her. No one knows how long Ruth wandered. The forest in that part of the Ozarks bends time. A day can stretch into weeks, a week vanish like smoke. She followed the river upstream, wading through icy water, calling her sons' names until her voice broke. At dusk, she found a clearing where the air shimmered faintly and the sound of bells drifted through the fog. She stepped forward, and the ground gave way. When she woke, she was lying on a bed of moss beneath a roof of twisted roots. Candles burned in jars around her, the air heavy with the smell of iron and milk. A figure sat beside her, stroking her hair. "You came back," said a voice she remembered. Sister Cora smiled with all the softness of a mother. "We didn't think you'd survive the trade." Ruth tried to stand, but her limbs felt heavy, her chest aching. "Where are my boys?" she croaked. Cora tilted her head. "They're safe. Together. More together than they've ever been." From the shadows, another figure appeared, Mavis, tall, calm, eyes shining like wet stone. "You broke the pact," she said. "You took what was ours when you left the hollow years ago. Now the debt is being balanced." Ruth didn't understand. She remembered years ago, after her husband's death, how she'd come to the hollow in secret, desperate for a child to live past its first winter. The witches had promised her sons if she gave something in return. She thought they meant blood. She didn't realize they meant souls. Mavis lifted her hand and the air rippled. Two figures stepped from the dark, Elias and Jonas, or what remained of them. Their skin was pale as moonlight, eyes gray and distant. They moved like one being, their gestures mirrored, their voices echoing. "Ma," Jonas whispered, but the word came doubled as if spoken through two throats at once. Ruth reached out trembling, touching their faces. "Cold, smooth, empty. What have you done to them?" "They're healed," Mavis said gently. "No more weakness. No more sickness. They'll never die unless you take their place." Ruth backed away shaking. "Take me then," she said. "Take me and give them back." The witches exchanged a look. Cora's smile widened. "It's not that simple. To undo what's been joined, you must feed the hollow something stronger." She pointed to the fire pit at the center of the room. "Blood bound by guilt. The same that bargained twice." Ruth knew what they wanted. She drew the knife from her belt, the one she'd carried since her husband's death, and pressed the blade to her palm. "Tell me what to do." Mavis stepped closer. "Cut across the heart line. Call their names until the forest answers. If it loves you, it'll trade." She did as told. Blood fell on the roots and the hollow shuddered. Wind rushed through the cavern, blowing out half the candles. Somewhere outside, a howl rose, not of an animal but something older, deeper. The witches stepped back as the floor split open. Light burst upward, blinding white. Ruth saw her boys separate, bodies pulling apart with a cry that wasn't human. Then darkness swallowed everything. When she woke again, she was alone. The cabin gone. The hollow silent. And lying beside her were two shapes, her sons, breathing, alive but still, their eyes shut tight. She wept and held them, whispering prayers she hadn't said in years. But the forest had changed. The sky above was the color of bruises, the trees taller than before. Time had shifted. She tried to carry the boys home, but every path twisted back on itself. By the third day she realized the truth. Devil's Hollow had let them live, but it wouldn't let them leave. And somewhere behind her, faint as wind through grass, came a voice that wasn't hers. The debt was never yours to pay. Ruth stayed in the cabin because there was nowhere else to go. The Hollow didn't let her leave. Every path she took folded back into itself like a maze made by something cruel and clever. The woods whispered names she tried not to recognize. Caleb, Milo, Jesse, spoken in voices that were almost human, almost kind. She marked days by the candles she burned, though the light never reached far in that place. The air was heavy, damp, and full of quiet breathing. When she dared to step outside, the forest seemed to tilt around her, every tree bending just slightly toward her as if waiting for her to confess. On the fifth night, it rained, a thick, silver rain that never touched the ground. The drops hung suspended in the air, shimmering like glass beads. Ruth stood on the porch, trembling as three shapes moved within the rain. They were tall, their skin pale, their eyes the color of the trough water. Her boys, or what was left of them. "Ma," the tallest said, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "You can't stay here. The Hollow's hungry again." She backed away. "Caleb." The shapes flickered like candlelight. "We're not him anymore," said the smaller one. "We're all of us. Together." Ruth stumbled inside and slammed the door. But the sound didn't echo, it was swallowed as though the air refused to carry noise. When she looked through the window, the rain had stopped. Only a smear of wet handprints marked the glass, 3 different sizes. That night she heard footsteps on the roof, slow, dragging. Something whispered in the chimney. And under the floorboards, water moved, shifting in rhythm with the sound of her breath. By morning she found muddy footprints on the porch, bare, large, and smeared with river clay. She didn't sleep again after that. On the 7th day, a figure appeared at the edge of the woods. It was the eldest witch, though her body looked wrong now, her spine bent, her hair tangled with leaves, her skin cracked like bark. She stood silent for a long time before speaking. "The Hollow isn't done with you," she said softly. "You opened a door, Ruth. It doesn't close for those who listen." Ruth shouted through the glass, "Where are they? My boys, what have you done to them?" The witch tilted her head. "They're home. They belong to what feeds us all." You should be proud, they are the roots now. Ruth's hands trembled against the window frame. Take me instead. The witch's smile was small, tired. It doesn't work that way. Blood remembers the bargain. She turned and walked back into the trees, vanishing into the green-black mist that always hung over the hollow's heart. After that, Ruth began to hear the river calling her name. It was soft at first like memory, then louder, an endless whisper that followed her inside, coiling through the rafters. When she tried to ignore it, the house changed. The mirrors darkened. The wood pulsed faintly beneath her palms. The walls wept water at night. One evening she heard laughter from the back room, the one that had once been the boys' sleeping quarters. She pushed open the door. The air smelled like rain and burnt cedar. 3 shadows played across the wall, dancing without bodies. One voice said, "Ma." Another said, "Don't cry." Her knees gave out. She crawled forward, reaching toward the voices. "Come home," she whispered. "Please." Something cold brushed her cheek like a wet hand. Then silence. In the days that followed, Ruth began to change too. Her reflection blurred at the edges. Her shadow lagged behind her steps. Her voice echoed seconds after she spoke. The hollow was claiming her, thread by thread. A traveler found her weeks later, or so the story says. He was a trapper passing through the Ozarks, chasing pelts and coin. He found the cabin half swallowed by vines, its windows black with soot. Ruth sat on the porch in her old shawl, eyes glassy, smiling faintly. She asked him if he'd seen 3 boys on the road, said they were supposed to come home for supper. The man offered to take her down the mountain. She nodded, but when he turned around to fetch his pack, she was gone. Only the shawl remained, folded neatly on the chair. That was the last anyone saw of her. But some say the hollow still breathes. That on moonless nights, when the air turns heavy, the river near the Ozark cliffs runs thicker, dark like ink. And if you listen close, you'll hear 3 voices humming from beneath the surface. Locals avoid the place now. They call it Mother's Hollow. Children are told not to follow strange lights into the woods. Travelers who camp too close wake to the sound of crying, soft, distant, and wrong. There's an old superstition among the few who still live near those hills. If you ever see ripples in still water, don't look too long, because it might look back. And if you hear someone call your name from the trees, answer with a prayer, not your voice. Because names in that part of Missouri still belong to the hollow. And blood bargains never end. Time moved strangely in the Ozarks, as if the mountains kept their own clock. By the turn of the century, most who had known Ruth or her sons were gone, buried under unmarked stones or swallowed by the valleys. Yet her story lingered in whispers. Folks said the hollow had turned wild, that the air there carried a sickness of memory. Trees grew in twisted shapes, and no birds sang past the old river bend. In 1902, a pair of surveyors from St. Louis came to map the northern ridge. One was a quiet man named Abram Leary, known for his patience and precision. The other, Thomas Red, was younger and full of doubtless ambition. They'd heard nothing of Mother's Hollow, just that the land was unclaimed and thick with opportunity. The first day passed without trouble. The air was sweet with pine and the ground soft underfoot. But by dusk, the forest turned cold and the fog rolled in from nowhere. Abram suggested they make camp early. Thomas laughed and pressed on, saying no mist could frighten him. When they finally stopped, it was beside a creek that didn't appear on any of their maps. That night, Abram awoke to the sound of dripping water, slow, deliberate, like footsteps made of rain. He looked out of the tent flap and froze. Across the creek stood 3 figures. They weren't moving, only swaying. Their outlines flickered as if made of the mist itself. One was taller, broad-shouldered. The other smaller, close together. For a moment, Abram thought they were travelers. Then he noticed the water rippling beneath their feet, though none of them stood deep enough to disturb it. He blinked and they were gone. At dawn, Thomas found him still sitting upright, staring toward the creek. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he joked. Abram didn't reply. They packed and walked west, but the compass spun endlessly, the needle circling as if lost in thought. The trees grew denser, their bark blackened. By noon they stumbled upon the remains of a house, half rotted, buried in ivy. The porch sagged, the roof opened to the sky. Thomas grinned. A perfect landmark. Maybe someone lived here once. Abram hesitated. Maybe still does. Inside, the air was cool and damp. A table lay overturned, a rocking chair missing one leg. But in the corner by the window stood something that didn't belong to time. A wooden cradle, half submerged in a puddle of water that refused to dry. Thomas nudged it with his boot. The cradle rocked once, creaking softly, though the air was still. Abram's throat tightened. "Leave it," he said, his voice low. But Thomas bent down anyway. Something glimmered inside, a coin blackened by age. He picked it up, brushing away the mud. The metal burned his skin. He cursed and dropped it, shaking his hand. Then came the sound, 3 voices humming low, somewhere between lullaby and lament. It filled the cabin, vibrating through the floor. Abram stumbled back, heart hammering. Thomas turned pale. "Do you hear that?" The sound rose, almost beautiful, almost unbearable. They fled. But the forest seemed endless now. The fog grew heavier, the air thick like syrup. They ran until their legs failed, until the cabin was gone, and the world was only gray. When the mist thinned, they found themselves standing by a river that ran black as ink. In its surface, Abram saw faces, 3 young men, eyes pale, mouths moving silently. Behind them, the outline of a woman. Her hair floated like seaweed, her face peaceful, almost kind. Then her eyes opened. Abram fell to his knees. The river's surface broke apart, splashing his boots, his hands. He could still hear Thomas calling his name, distant and panicked, but it was fading. The woman's voice filled his ears instead, whispering in a tone older than the mountain itself. "Write us down," she said. "Remember us right." When Abram woke, it was morning. The river was gone. Thomas lay a few yards away, pale as chalk. His eyes were open, but there was no breath left in him. Abram stumbled through the woods for hours before finding the road. When locals discovered him, he could barely speak. He told them about the fog, the cabin, the faces beneath the water. They called him fevered, said the mountain air had driven him half mad. But the old ones, those who remembered the hollow, nodded in silence. A preacher from Arkansas later found Thomas's notebook, soaked and mud-stained. Inside were maps of the Ozarks, lines drawn in ink that seemed to bleed. In one margin, a phrase repeated again and again in a shaky hand. 3 sons, 1 mother, 3 rivers that never meet. That notebook made its way into a private collection in Springfield, locked in a drawer and forgotten. Yet, travelers still claim to see the 3 figures near the northern ridge. Always by water. Always before dawn. Some say they're protecting something buried deep beneath the hollow. Others say they're still looking for their mother. And sometimes, when the air is cold and the fog runs low, the river hums again, carrying voices no living tongue can name. The locals keep their distance. They build their homes far from the valley. Because in that place time doesn't forget. It waits. And anyone who listens too long starts to hum too. By the time the 21st century rolled in, Mother's Hollow had all but vanished from modern maps. Satellite images showed nothing unusual, just dense woodland and the faint trace of an abandoned road cutting through. Yet stories persisted. Hunters avoided the ridge. Locals sold their land for cheap. And once in a while, a hiker would wander too far and come back different. Dr. Clara Vance didn't believe in curses. She believed in data, in old records, in the way human memory tangled with superstition. Her specialty was American folklore tied to settler isolation, how people created monsters to explain suffering. But when she found the Leary journals in a university archive, water-stained and half illegible, something about the phrasing unsettled her. 3 sons, 1 mother, 3 rivers that never meet. She couldn't shake it. In 2024, she filed for a small research grant and drove to southern Missouri, following the coordinates roughly where the hollow should have been. She stayed in a decaying inn off Route 60, where the owner, a gray-haired man named Wyatt, eyed her map and shook his head. "You're not going down there alone, are ya?" "It's for a dissertation," Clara smiled. "Folklore, not ghost hunting." Wyatt didn't smile back. "Folklore's just the word folks use when truth gets ugly." He refused to mark her map, only said, If you find the creek, don't drink from it. Don't cross it neither. She thought he was joking. The next morning, fog blanketed the valley. The forest was still, unnaturally so. She followed what was left of an old logging trail until her GPS blinked and lost signal. Ahead, she saw the remnants of stone, maybe a foundation swallowed by roots. She crouched, brushing moss from a corner. Beneath it, carved letters, Aram. Ruth Moore. Her pulse quickened. She set up her recorder, speaking softly for the log. Possible site of Moore cabin circa 1860s. Locals refer to area as Mother's Hollow. Heavy overgrowth, soil unusually damp. A branch cracked behind her. She turned sharply. Nothing. Just mist and dripping leaves. She walked deeper, following the sound of water until she reached a creek, the same one she suspected from the old survey notes. Its surface shimmered darkly. When she leaned closer, her reflection rippled, not distorted exactly but multiplied. 3 faces stared back. She stumbled back, heart hammering. The air felt heavier now, charged like before a storm. She shut off the recorder and packed fast. But before she could leave, something caught her eye. An old cradle half buried in mud, its wood soft as sponge. She bent down, brushing off the silt. Inside lay a single coin, black as soot. Her breath caught. She remembered the journal, Thomas Reed's burned hand, the same description. Her rational mind said it was impossible. Her gut said otherwise. She reached out. The coin was cold at first, then warm. And then she wasn't standing in the forest anymore. The trees had changed. The light was golden, the air thick with smoke and song. A cabin stood whole before her. Inside, laughter. She saw 3 young men around a table, faces gaunt but smiling. A woman by the hearth, her hair streaked with silver, singing softly. For one suspended moment, Clara forgot who she was. Then one of the men turned. His eyes found hers through the window, blue-gray, hollow, knowing. The laughter stopped. The woman's song faltered. And in a voice that came not from his throat but from the air itself, he said, "You shouldn't have come." The vision shattered. Clara was back in the forest, gasping, the coin still clutched in her hand. The cradle was gone. The fog pressed close. She ran. Branches tore at her clothes. Roots snagged her boots. She didn't stop until she reached the car, mud-streaked and trembling. The engine coughed twice before catching. When she looked in the rearview mirror, she saw the creek again, just visible through the trees. In its reflection, 4 figures now stood. That night at the inn, Wyatt found her sitting in the hallway, staring at nothing. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke. "They're still there," she whispered. "She's still there." Wyatt's face went pale. "You saw the mother?" Clara nodded. "And the sons?" "They weren't angry. Just waiting." He swallowed hard. "That's what she does. She waits." She left Missouri the next morning. But the recordings from her field notes had changed. Where her voice should have been, there were faint overlapping hums, a harmony of 3 tones echoing faintly, impossibly. Back at the university, the faculty dismissed her findings. Audio corruption. Environmental hallucination. Stress. But late one night, while reviewing the files alone, Clara noticed something new. Between the hums, faintly audible, a phrase repeated 3 times, each softer than the last. "Write us down." The same words Abram Leary had written a century ago. After that, Clara stopped sleeping well. Her apartment filled with damp air, though no leak could be found. The mirrors in her hallway began to fog on their own. And sometimes, when the moonlight hit the glass just right, her reflection wasn't alone. 3 others stood behind her. The recordings were never supposed to leave the university archives. After Dr. Clara Vance's mysterious disappearance in 2027, her field notes and equipment were sealed under restricted access. Officially, she had resigned and moved overseas. Unofficially, no one ever heard from her again. 30 years later, the university digitized its folklore collections. Hundreds of hours of analog tapes were transferred to an open-access database. The archivist assigned to the project, a quiet graduate assistant named Alex Moreno, had never heard of Clara Vance. To him, she was just another forgotten researcher lost to time. But when he played the files labeled hollow_records_01E06, his monitor flickered. Static, faint breathing, then a pattern of 3 humming tones. Alex frowned. He adjusted his headphones. Probably tape degradation, he muttered, making a note. He moved to normalize the audio levels, and froze. Behind the hum, a woman's voice whispered, "Do you hear them?" He yanked the headphones off. No one else was in the room. The temperature seemed to drop. The monitor light dimmed, then pulsed faintly as if syncing with the rhythm of the hum. He pressed play again. Now, layered beneath the static, there were other voices, 3 distinct male tones, overlapping slightly out of sync. The waveform on screen didn't match the sound. It moved independently, jittering upward when no sound played. He leaned closer, captivated and unnerved. When he zoomed in on the spectrogram, a pattern appeared, a spiral of repeating arcs, almost organic. It wasn't random noise. It was deliberate. He took screenshots, then uploaded one to a linguistics forum. Within an hour, someone replied, "This looks like runic or Proto-Germanic structure." The comment read, "Are you sure it's audio?" He wasn't. The next morning, Alex arrived early to run an isolated test. He played the hum at double speed, then reversed it. The result wasn't noise anymore. It was chanting, slow, distorted syllables forming a single repeated phrase. "Mother calls the sons home." Every repetition deepened in tone, as though descending. He shut the program and rubbed his temples. He hadn't eaten. The room smelled faintly of wet earth, though the windows were sealed. By the 3rd day, the building's Wi-Fi started to lag. The IT team said one server was looping massive audio processes, chewing bandwidth. The file name, hollow_submerged.wave. Alex hadn't made it. He unplugged the workstation, but the hum persisted, now audible without headphones. Students passing by complained of nausea, vertigo. The sound wasn't in the air. It was in the wiring. He panicked. He tried to delete the project. But every time he clicked erase, the cursor hesitated, then glided on its own, hovering over duplicate. The lights flickered. Somewhere inside the archives, a motion sensor triggered. He turned, flashlight in hand. The beam caught dust motes, shelves, and boxes marked Field Research, Ozarks. Footsteps echoed behind him. He spun around, heart pounding. No one. He was about to leave when his eye caught a reflection in the glass display case, the faint outline of 4 figures. A woman, hair streaked white, smiling softly. 3 tall men behind her, eyes like mirrors. The hum grew louder. Alex stumbled backward, knocking over a box. Papers scattered, Clara's transcriptions yellow with age. On one page, written in hurried pen, a line underlined 3 times. "They live through memory." His breath fogged the glass. And this time, in his reflection, the woman moved. Her lips parted, whispering something he couldn't hear over the rising tone. He pressed his hands against his ears. The pitch cut higher, drilling into his skull, until suddenly silence. He opened his eyes. The archives were empty. The monitors dark. But on the central screen, one line of text blinked in green. Transfer complete. Weeks later, the university server logs recorded an unexplained replication anomaly. The hollow_records audio had duplicated across thousands of devices worldwide, attached invisibly to unrelated media. Podcasts, music files, YouTube uploads. Each carried a faint background hum. Online forums began noticing it first. Anyone else hearing this weird 3-tone drone behind random videos? It's in Spotify too. Can't unhear it. My Alexa just played it on repeat. The hum had gone viral. In a rural town in Arkansas, a truck driver swerved off-road after claiming to hear voices over his CB radio. In Seoul, a sound engineer reported seeing faces in her spectrogram visualization. And in a London recording booth, a podcaster stopped mid-sentence and whispered, "She's behind me, isn't she?" They all described the same woman. White hair, black eyes, a kind smile, and 3 shadows standing over her shoulder. Researchers tried to trace the source, but every attempt to delete the files caused spontaneous duplication. Digital archives began to crash. Cloud backups regenerated with the same embedded hum. The sound became an infection of memory itself, replicating through code, through resonance, through any system that could hold sound. Somewhere in that endless signal, a faint voice could still be heard if you listen long enough. Write us down. And people did. Across platforms, languages, and continents, posts appeared daily describing the hum, the visions, the dreams of a cabin in the woods. Someone even uploaded a slowed version of the sound to YouTube. It reached 2 million views in 3 days before being taken down. The comments section had one pinned post, left by an unknown account. We were the sons. She was the mother. And you listened. The channel was deleted within hours, but the audio had already spread to mirror sites, fan remixes, and urban legend podcasts. Folklorists call it the hollow phenomenon. Scientists call it auditory contagion. The faithful call it proof. Whatever it is, the line between myth and memory is gone. Because somewhere beneath all the noise of human history, beneath streaming data and decaying archives, 3 brothers still hum their endless song. And their mother waits for the next soul curious enough to listen. Before we end, if you're hearing faint tones even now, please subscribe for more stories buried beneath history's silence.